Welcome here to TalkFCB and welcome back to the channel here today, guys, where we are going to be exploring La Liga's major problem right now. And the most incredible, the most extraordinary thing is, this is a problem that La Liga have literally created themselves. We have to look into the numbers behind this summer transfer window. We have to understand where La Liga is in terms of the major leagues, in terms of the spending. But only in terms of the spending, it's not all about money spent, it's not all about buying players for million upon million upon million. I understand all of that. But you also have to take into account the sales that we are seeing. And it's simply because of La Liga's unbelievably strict financial fair play restrictions that teams are being put in a desperate situation. What we are going to see in today's video, we're going to go team by team, we are going to explore the incomings, the outgoings, we're going to make comparisons with other leagues, and you are going to see how weak La Liga have made its own teams, the position that they have put each and every one of these teams in. And as we go on through this list of teams, we get to some European heavyweights. We get to teams who have been competing on the European stage, who've won European titles, who have been reduced to literally nothing by what Tebas is doing. And that needs to be said. That needs to be explored. So get ready. Sit back. And let's do this. Because let me first of all provide some context here. Because in the Premier League, throughout the summer transfer window, we saw the Premier League break all sorts of records. We have seen their spending eclipse £3 billion. It has been an absolutely extraordinary window for money spent there, and money brought in as well, don't forget, in the Premier League. That is important to note as well. And the averages here work out in euros now at around 179 million spent per club. That is the average Premier League spend. And one figure that I want you to really bear in mind right throughout this video, that newly promoted Sunderland, they spent this summer 210 million. They spent more, and you will see the unbelievable disparity between these clubs. They spent more than every La Liga team. You can't tell me that's right. You cannot tell me that this league right here is doing things properly. Let's look at these figures. Because starting first of all then with Athletic Club, who admittedly, Athletic are a little bit different to the other clubs that we're going to talk about. Of course, given their transfer policy, they can only really make moves when it's possible for them in terms of Basque-born players. That is, of course, their transfer policy. They actually failed to get one of them over the line in Aymeric Laporte. That is a little bit humorous there, given what happened with Athletic and all the Nico Williams stuff this summer. But yeah, they didn't spend a great deal of money. They also didn't bring in too much either, because really, they only ever sell players, you know, the big players, for their release clauses. And sometimes, as we saw in the case of Nico, even sometimes the release clause is not even acceptable too. So Athletic there are not really what we're talking about right now. Then there's Atletico Madrid, who, to be fair, were actually one of the biggest spenders in La Liga this summer. They really did go out. I think they tried to bring down the average age of their squad. Simeone here trying to really freshen things up. Now, early on in the season, it's not actually working out too well for them. They haven't exactly started very well at all, but Baena, I'm sure he'll come good. He was picked up there for 42 million euros, which, as we're going to say here, in terms of Villarreal selling him, that's probably still a bit on the cheap side, as is Johnny Cardoso there, joining from Betis for a very, very modest fee, in my opinion. Atleti did bring in, you know, a few fees here and there. Again, not exactly selling on the high side. Atletico Madrid are another club who really do struggle a lot of the time to sell players for a decent amount, and that is another theme that you will notice in La Liga. Because then we move on to Osasuna. You know, if you watch La Liga, certainly here as Barcelona fans, it's never an easy game. They're always a tricky opponent there to come up against. They're a really, really good side in La Liga. What did they spend this summer? 5 million euros. You know, they brought in one player for that. They had to rely on loans. They had to rely there on free transfers coming in. And they were able to bring in then, as a result of that sale to Athletic, 12 million euros. So hardly anything going on there. Hardly any room to improve on what they have. They've not really been able to look at anyone at all this summer. And then you've got somebody like Celta Vigo. Now, bear in mind, this is now a European club. They are going to be competing in European competition this summer. And look what they've been able to do. They've spent 14 million euros. And admittedly, some of these are very relevant to Barca. Ilash Moriba signing there permanently. Jukla, we actually received a tiny percentage of that fee. They also got Brian Zaragoza on loan from Bayern. We were linked with him in the window. But then you look at their exits. And again, this is a team competing in Europe, then having to sell their best players to Wolverhampton Wanderers. And again, this is a theme. You will find mid-table at best, probably bottom half teams, their lower league stuff in the Premier League, picking up some of the best talents in La Liga, and they're not for big amounts. We're talking about 20 million euros, they're 25 million. Those are not big fees for Premier League clubs. I mean, there was even rumours that Wolves could sell on Larsson to Newcastle immediately this summer for much, much bigger money. So again, we're seeing top quality talent sold pretty cheaply. Because then you've got Deportivo Alavés, who again, they've spent in total this summer 10 million. That's it. We're getting teams here spending 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 million. I mean, Premier League clubs wake up in the morning, they spend 10 million just on the drive to work, just on the drive in, not even signing any players. They're just spending that with ease. It's unbelievable what we're seeing. Carlos Alenya there, of course, a relevant name to Barca. He joined for just 1 million from Getafe. Denis Suarez coming in on a free from Villarreal. And in terms of their selling, of course, again, you're looking at some of their brightest talents, you're looking at some of their best players. They've gone. Every single team, mid-table, even European clubs in La Liga, they are selling on some of their best talents, and they're not really able to replace them. They're not able to go out. They're not able to spend money. Because then you have newly promoted Elche, and this is a team who are in La Liga. They've got a great atmosphere inside their stadium. They made a really promising start, to be honest, to the La Liga season. They're a newly promoted team. Remember, Sunderland in the Premier League, they spent 210 million upon their return to the Premier League. Elche, 6.75. They have spent 6 million euros. You're coming up, you've got all those hopes, all those dreams, all those aspirations. All you can spend is 6.75 million. They got Hector Fort there in on loan right at the end of the window. Interested to see how he does there. But it's just ridiculous. And again, they've sold 13 million worth of players. So nearly every club here we're coming to, they're making a profit. That's all that seems to be important to La Liga. It's not about what happens on the field. It's not about teams here improving and aspiring and dreaming and winning. It's about making a profit. Now, we're making football even more of a business than it already is. And then you come to one of the big ones. Then you come to one of the big conversations this summer that we've had all summer long and for many, many years now. Barcelona spent 27.5 million. And as we've joked about, as we've laughed about, but it's not funny, that's the same as Wrexham. We're not even talking about Premier League now. We're talking about championship clubs. Barcelona have been reduced to spending that. And please don't tell me, it's because you don't have money. It's because Barca don't generate any money. We generate one of the highest incomes in the entire footballing world. We can't spend that money. La Liga is chaining these clubs up, and as a result, when you look at our sales, there's players here who no doubt could have been sold for more. There's players here who we could have got much, much more out of, but you make these clubs desperate. Even in the case of Barca, even in the case of one of the biggest clubs in the world, they've been put in a weak position, and even they are suffering. Because then you've got Getafe, and again, it's a team here who year upon year, they find a way to compete. I'm not a big Getafe fan. I wouldn't really miss them if they weren't in La Liga, to be perfectly honest with you. But even they, I can concede here, they've done nothing. I mean, they have literally spent less than 2 million. We're talking about 2 million in footballing terms, in modern day standards. That is literally pocket change. It is ridiculous. And the only thing I have to say here with regard to Getafe, and the only thing to really celebrate, look at their sales. One man who's gone, it's Neom. He is no longer part of this team. He's no longer part of Getafe. We will no longer have to deal with him. That is something to really celebrate today. Which brings us then to Girona, which is even more ridiculous. This is one right now that, okay, they spent 27 million, which, by the way, they're a team that last season, they were in the Champions League. So they're still picking up some of the money from that there. They're still having that in the fair play, which allows them to spend a bit more. But then you look at their sales. They've sold 56 million's worth of players, and this is a team right now that are badly struggling. They are selling their best players, even late into the window. They're bottom of the league. They conceded 10 goals. They've only scored 1. They've got no points. They're in real trouble, and they're still having to sell. They are still having to rip their squad apart. Again, selling to Wolves, selling to Napoli, selling to Rangers in the Scottish Premier League. What is happening? What is happening to these clubs here? The position they're being put in, they can't fight it. They can't fight relegation. They can't fight these mid-table battles. They can't aspire to be at the top again. Girona spent one season in the Champions League, and now this squad, it's been decimated. And then you've got Levante. Okay, another newly promoted club in La Liga. This summer they have spent a total, again, it's the same situation, 5.5 million, a newly promoted team. They've got a great fan base as well. We've played them early on in this season. They gave us a really, really tough game. They are a good team. They've got good players here. They've spent, and they've only been allowed to spend just over 5 million euros. And then they just break even. Because every team here, even if they have spent 5 million, La Liga basically make them sell that much. You can't spend without bringing anything in. You can't here have that balance sheet a little bit uneven. You've got to sell players. You've got to make way for those coming in. So even they have broken even. You've got Rayo Vallecano. Now, they are a team who, again, have made a massive step up. They're going to be competing in Europe. And admittedly, on this incoming sheet here, it should say new pitch. It doesn't. They have not replaced their pitch, and they should have done because it's a joke. But again, La Liga don't care about that. La Liga don't seem to have any standards or any requirements here in terms of the playing surface, in terms of stadiums, their surroundings. They don't seem to care about any of that. All they want is don't spend, and if you do spend, make sure you sell enough. Make sure that you are selling your best players. And Rayo, one of the few clubs this summer who brought nothing in. They let a lot of players go there on free transfers, probably because they're trying to reduce the wages. Don't forget about that as well. That's why a lot of clubs are desperate too. They're trying to reduce that wage cap to fit in and be able to register some of their new signings. You got teams like Espanyol, who again, if they weren't around in La Liga, I honestly wouldn't miss them. They spent 14 million this summer. They actually had quite a positive start to the season, but again, they offset that by selling their best player. We did meet the release clause of Joan Garcia. He's an incredible player. Thank you, Espanyol, for him. And we don't really need to talk too much more about them. But then there's Mallorca. I mean, look at this one right here. And again, they've signed players from Barca, but for very, very small amounts. They spent 8.5 million euros. We could have got more, no doubt about it, Pablo Torre. We could have got more for Jan Virgili. But again, Mallorca, one, they couldn't pay it. So already here you're seeing that, on the one hand, Barca can't sell for a good amount because they're desperate. Mallorca couldn't pay any more than that because they're also desperate. They can't overspend. Barca need the money. So you have created here, Tebas, in La Liga, such desperation that nobody is doing good business with anyone. Mallorca, again, bring in more than they have bought. Which brings us on then to Real Betis, who again, they are actually one of the really big spenders in La Liga this summer. They have spent a total of 62 million euros, which is quite incredible because in La Liga right now, that's an eye-watering sum. I mean, 62 million, a fee there that Premier League clubs are just shelling out on random players. Let's be honest, they have signed players in the Premier League this summer that maybe we haven't even heard of for 50, 60 million euros. Betis, though, have brought Anthony in, of course. That was a deal that waited right up until the last minute because they couldn't overpay on him. They got their man in the end. But then even Betis, they might have spent a lot of money. They've still brought it all back in. They sold Johnny Cardoso. They also sold their really exciting young player, Como, to balance the books. They couldn't bring Anthony back in. They couldn't get him registered and all of that stuff without selling players too. So even Betis, who have been a bit more ambitious because they're in Europe, they still have ended with more sales than purchases. Real Madrid, obviously, as well, are one of the outliers. They have been able to spend big money this summer. But even in terms of Real Madrid, people will say that, Real Madrid, they've been allowed to spend. They spent loads and loads of money. To be fair, though, 167 million, that is still less than your average Premier League club. So they are still spending less this summer than Sunderland. Real Madrid have more spending power than that. They haven't brought in much money either. But Barca and Madrid here, they are still, even though Madrid are able to spend, they're still being held back. Make no mistake about it. Real Oviedo, I mean, they're another club new to La Liga, especially for them. It's been a long time. They've been away for a long time. They want to stay here. They want to make it last. They've got incredibly passionate fans at Real Oviedo. 3.5 million. That's all they've spent there. They've had to rely on so many loans. I mean, look at the amount of loans they're being brought in. A lot of free transfers as well. And they've only spent 3.5 million. And also, they brought nothing in. They've not been able to sell for any big amounts. They've not been able there to do any business on the outgoings. So all they've done this summer, 3.5 million worth of business. When it comes to Real Sociedad, I mean, they're a team here who had a poor season last time out. They need to improve their squad. They're under new management as well there. They need to bring in players who are going to affect their team. They've gone for a few midfielders. They've also taken a bit of a punt on Guedes coming in from Wolves there from the Premier League. But again, with Real Sociedad, what happened with them this summer? they lost their best player. You know, they sold their best player, and admittedly, at least this one was for a good fee. And this is what I'm talking about here. This had to be the release clause, basically, for Martin Zubimendi. Arsenal had to wait a long time, actually, to get their man, and Real Sociedad, one of the few clubs who managed to sell a player for actually what they are worth. You know, there shouldn't be 20 million sales here. People shouldn't be forced into 30 million deals with Premier League clubs. Sell for the true amount, and that is one thing that we have seen there with Martin Zubimendi, because then we move on to one of the truly heartbreaking ones. You know, genuinely, guys, Sevilla right here, it's just embarrassing. There's no other word for it. This is a team, do not forget, that were battling at the very top of European football. You know, it's not very long ago they were winning European titles. They dominated the Europa League. They were swatting aside Premier League teams on the way to these titles. This summer, they have spent 250,000. 250,000. We're not talking about millions. 250,000. That's all that they've been reduced to. They're signing players like Alexis Sanchez on a free transfer. He was a brilliant player in his day. Of course he was. He's 36 years old now. This is what Sevilla have been limited to. And of course, they brought in 55 million because they have to. They have sold literally their two best players, Loic Bade, Luque Bacchio. They've both gone. They're both out the door. Sevilla significantly weakened. They sold there to Bayer Leverkusen. They've sold to Benfica. So they're not even having to sell their best players just to Premier League clubs now. This extends to the Bundesliga. It extends to Portuguese clubs. It extends to Italian clubs. Everybody is taking advantage now of this situation in La Liga. And then you look at Valencia. This is a club who have been absolutely terribly run. So don't tell me, Tebas, that, oh, these restrictions now, they make clubs well run. Valencia have really been through it. Valencia have had such a difficult time, and it's showing no sign of turning around. A club like Valencia, again, they have won league titles in the not so distant memory. They've been battling in European competition too. They spent 11 million. 11 million. Some of those exciting La Liga players that I can remember came up through Valencia. They've been playing there. David Silva, David Villa, all of these exciting players. What are they doing now? Who are they producing now? They're selling. They're a selling club. They're not able to bring in new talents. They're not able to create anything. It's just sad. It's really pitiful what is happening to some of these La Liga teams. And then Villarreal, I mean, they've got Champions League football, so they've been allowed to be a little bit more ambitious. They've actually spent a decent amount of money this summer, 102 million, which, like I say in La Liga, it's massive money. That's still only half of what Sunderland spent, but for La Liga, it's big, big money. But they've still had to sell their best talents. You know, they've still sold Alex Baena, in my opinion, on the cheap there to Atletico Madrid. They sold Barry, a really exciting forward, to Everton. And Jeremy Pino has gone to Crystal Palace for, again, only 30 million euros. We are underselling in this league. And why? It's because the clubs are forced. They are forced into this situation. Because at the end of the day, guys, this is what we are dealing with right now. Forget about the Premier League. We are not just comparing here La Liga's spending and they're selling to the Premier League. La Liga are way down. We are behind Serie A. We are behind the Bundesliga. Liga are catching up at an incredible rate. And don't just look at the spending. I am not just talking here about La Liga buying players. Look at the income. The Premier League there, miles ahead, obviously. But Serie A have sold players for double the amount that La Liga have. So pretty much of the Bundesliga. Look at Liga 1. They're selling for more. Even the English Championship nearly sold players for as much as La Liga did. That is not right. Nobody can tell me there that looking at those numbers, looking deeper into the figures, that these financial restrictions are helping the league. Javier Tebas, year upon year, season upon season, La Liga is falling further behind. This has to be talked about. This has to be highlighted. And that is why today, guys, I know it's a bit of a different video. I know that I've probably gone on here for a while, but we needed to talk about this in full. We need to have this conversation and share this with everybody you know. Shout it from the rooftops. La Liga has a problem that desperately needs solving. So please let me know all of your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you indeed here for making it all the way to the end. Although, yeah, like I say, some of these figures, they were a bit depressing, but I appreciate all of your support. I will see all of you soon, but thanks for watching. And until next time, as always, Veshka, El Barca.